All right, folks, welcome back. Sheepdog Smokey here. It is time for class time yet again. Where we left off last week was basically how the Constitution and our current form of government was brought into being. We'd seen that the Articles of Confederation left the government very much unable to do anything, really. They could ask for money from the states, but the states almost unanimously and always said no. Couldn't pay the men who had fought for the freedom that we now had. So we had to have a new form of government that had the power to do what it needed to do, but also respected the power of each individual state. As always, when you're dealing with a large group of people, there are going to be multiple ideas brought to the table. Everyone who brings an idea to the table is going to be just convinced their way is the right way. In this case, we had two ideas, and it really did lead to both being implemented. We had the Virginia plan. It's a bicameral House, but it is representative of the population. In this case, the House and the Senate would both be a version of what we now know of as the House of Representatives. Whereas the New Jersey plan is unicameral, single governing body, and every state is equal. So Maryland or Rhode Island, one vote each. New York, California, one vote each. Very much what we have in the Senate, but without any other legislative body. What this leads to is the Connecticut Compromise. It's a bicameral House where we have one of each. In the House of Representatives, your representation is based on how much or how large your population is. Texas, New York, California are going to have more representation than Maryland or Rhode Island or even Connecticut in the House. Whereas in the Senate, every state has two votes. Very much what we saw as a problem in the early days where we had no representation, but also allowing for differences of opinion and differences of need to both be addressed. One body will have much more power in one area than the other, and vice versa. For example, only the House can actually levy a tax. This is what the argument in 2012 was with the Affordable Care Act, because the fine for not having medical insurance that was approved under the ACA was, by many, deemed a tax that originated in the Senate, which is unconstitutional. It must originate in the House. Well, in the House, everyone is represented proportionally. So those who are going to be sending more money from their state to the federal government have more representation than those who will be sending far less. And it works. It has for 240 odd years. Where they came to another impasse is the issue of non-citizens. And I say it that way because it very much was non-citizens. It was not just slaves. So any foreigners living in the U.S., any native tribes who were not yet citizens of the U.S., and any slaves. Anyone who was not a citizen. How is this to be counted? When it came to slaves, of course, slave owners did not want to count them as property for taxation, but they did want to count them for representation. The Northerners, unfortunately, were not willing to just bow in their eyes. Unfortunately, were not willing to bow in the eyes of people who disagree with slavery. But it created that impasse. The Northerners said, no, if they are property, we're going to tax them, but if they're property, they don't count for representation. Very much just 180 degrees off of the Southern desire. Which leads to the 3/5 Compromise. Basically said that slaves would count as both. Non-citizens would be counted for representation, and so on and so forth, but at 3/5 of the number. So if there were 50,000 in the U.S., non-citizens, whether they be slaves, Native Americans, or foreign workers or foreign residents. That population of 50,000 would be counted at 30,000. That is what the original 3/5 compromise was. It was not that after the Civil War, a black American's vote counted as 3/5 of a vote. It was very much that slaves and other non-citizens would be counted. Slaves would be counted as the property that their owners deemed them to be, but the total number would be divided, and only 60% of that number would be applied for taxation or representation. We're not to the Civil War yet. We are still a good 60, 70 years from it, so we'll cover the rest of that issue when we get to it. Along these lines, of course, you have the abolitionists in the North already wanting to do away with slavery. You have the slave owners in the South saying, no, we're not going to. And you have the slave trade compromise. The import of slaves could not be restricted until 1808. So this is nearly 30 years that we're not going to be able to restrict the importation of new slaves into the new United States. With those issues agreed on with the compromises, we now get to the 17th of September, 1787, where 39 of 42 delegates signed the Constitution. Now, I've mentioned this before. In order to pass an amendment or to pass the Constitution, 3/4 of the states must ratify, but only 2/3 of the states must agree to put the Constitution out to the states, or in our case now, put an amendment out to the states. So basically you needed 28 to sign it, but then you would need 33 to ratify. 39 signed it, it's sent to the states. But we had people who realized that just the Constitution alone was not going to cover everything. The Constitution, very simply, laid the framework for the government itself. Article 1 created Congress with the bicameral House, states represented based on population, what the powers of the House of Representatives are. For example, the House of Representatives is where any new tax must originate. The Senate being equal representation, 2 votes per state, but what their jobs are as well. For example, confirming of new federal judges, things of this nature. Article 2 creates the executive branch, the President of the United States, his powers, his responsibilities, his duties, and limitations on what the President may do. Lays out how the President is to nominate new judges, how he is to have his cabinet approved. Ambassadors, being under the Department of State, would come into the executive branch. It would lay out their powers. Finally, Article 3 creates the judiciary. It lays out what the framework for a federal court system is. Ultimately, it would be all of the circuit courts as well as the Supreme Court. It would lay out their powers, how long judges may serve, what restrictions, what requirements are on the judicial branch. With this separation of power, for example, the president cannot make a law. Yes, there can be a presidential decree, but that is not a law. Presidential decrees are generally done for a state of emergency or things that are not going to be a permanent law. Whereas Congress must pass the law in both houses, send it to the executive branch to be signed. The executive branch, the president, can veto the bill. Say, no, we're not passing this law. It then must be sent back to the House and the Senate, who must overturn the veto with a supermajority. Virtually impossible. Even if one party controls both houses, it's very rare for a supermajority to happen. This creates a system of checks and balances. The House must be where any new tax originates. So the president can't say, we need money, I'm just going to raise your taxes. But the House and the Senate can't say, this law is passed. No questions. It's done. Because the president can say no. And it's very, very difficult to overturn a veto. At the end of all of this, though, while the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, the founders knew that time would see changes to technology, to society, to education, to any and everything that they could think of. So there was a path for amending the Constitution, which has been done 27 times in the last 239 years. This is very much because of the clash between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. The Federalists said, no, the government holds the power, while Anti-Federalists said, no, the people hold the power. We fought the war. We are the ones voting for representatives and for president and so on. We're the ones allowing you to exercise a limited amount of power. With all of this in mind, George Mason as well, knowing we needed to have a Bill of Rights, something the British government had just completely denied those living in the colonies, we get the original 10. Now, I've asked this question on Twitter, I've asked it on multiple social media platforms, but how many of you can actually say you know exactly how many rights are listed in the First Amendment? I know you're going to know that religion, speech, and the press are there, but that's not it. There are 5. Religion, press, speech, the right to peaceably assemble, which, oddly enough, Chris Cuomo, I believe, asked where it said that a protest must be peaceful. It says it in the First Amendment. And the right to petition for redress of grievances. You don't have to peaceably assemble to petition for redress. And a peaceful protest is not always a petition for redress. So those 5 are laid out. Pardon me. This is very much because in England and in the English colonies, you were Church of England. There was no other faith. The king is the head of the church. The press was very much restricted by the king. Speech restricted. You could not assemble. You could not petition for redress. These are things that had led directly to the Revolutionary War. The things we were being told we could not do now are codified into the Constitution as a right. Not something the government allows, but as a right. Something they cannot disallow. Number 2, keep and bear arms. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security and safety of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's very clear. And unfortunately, we have people today who want to reinterpret everything. The very people saying that this, that, and this, and that, and this, and that are just, well, that's just free speech. I've actually seen people saying that beating someone up is just free speech, so you can't even get mad at someone when they beat you to a pulp. But that same person will tell you arms only meant muskets. Apparently the founders were so profoundly intelligent, they knew that social media, smartphones, and everything else would come around and be a form of speech. But they were so profoundly stupid, they didn't know that firearms technology would advance, even when it already had at the time. They just couldn't afford the newer firearms. The other part of that is, it says militia, not military. The militia is very specifically a civilian organization. Very much what the Revolutionary Army was. We were not an organized military. In fact, we were people who, until this time, the British could say, you are being conscripted into our military to go fight a war against Spain. They could just show up and say, you're all Royal Army now. No, it's very much the opposite. In fact, if you hold a government position, you are specifically excluded from being able to be in a militia. As it is a civilian organization, again, what led to our being a free nation, a civilian militia fighting and beating the British at their own game, you have the right to be as well armed as any military force you may face. It's that simple. Number 3, no quartering of soldiers. In war or peace, the U.S. Army cannot just march up to your house and say, these 5 guys are going to live here with you. The British did that in the Revolutionary War. In fact, some people were told, your home is ours, get out. There were, while not a lot of them, there were instances where the British would do that. They would just show up, tell you to get out. This is where we will be living. And some of them torched the houses when they left. It was very much a move to demoralize those who were not fighting, to basically say, we're going to stop this when they stop fighting us, and get the normal citizens to say, just submit. 4th Amendment, no warrant without probable cause. Probable cause is a very sticky situation. Probable cause can be as simple as, I've been told by this person that this is happening. I need a warrant to go take photos and be able to prove it in court. Probable cause could be a suspect being described to match someone 99%, and the person they match to a 99% is someone with a 20-year history of the exact same crimes the suspect is a suspect for. Imagine you have, and I'm going to use myself for this, a 6'1", 235-pound white male, 30 to 50 years of age, right-handed, brown hair, brown eyes, and a brown beard, who is suspected of armed robbery. Now, if that suspect is later identified and suspected to be me, and they go and look at my record and I have 20 years of armed robbery charges, that's probable cause. That is what it takes to get a warrant. We've seen that that isn't really the case anymore. We had a warrant issued to surveil a candidate for public office based on a document that even the author says is not verifiable. If I come to you with a document that I wrote and I say, well, this is just conjecture, I can't verify any of this, that's not probable cause. That's me saying, well, this is what I think. That's not probable cause. And that trigger, that probable cause requirement, is to protect me from having my home searched when a 5-foot-tall, 75-year-old man robs a bank. Go find a 5-foot-tall, 75-year-old man, not a 6'1", 43-year-old man. It's that simple. The 5th Amendment. Oh, the joy of congressional hearings. You have the right to due process. You have the right to never be a witness against yourself. Basically, I plead the 5th. You have the right to, if you are charged with a capital crime, that must happen due to a grand jury charging you. Unless in time of war, when you can be charged with capital crimes without a grand jury. Very much a Benedict Arnold type thing. During war, if you aid the enemy, that's a capital crime. That's treason, sedition. Don't have to wait for a grand jury to issue that capital crime charge. The 6th Amendment. You have the right to a speedy and public trial. You have the right to know the charges against you. Pardon me. To confront those accusing you. And the right to a lawyer. Pardon me. This is something near and dear to my heart right now. Because, you see, right now we have a lot of states that are trying to pass what they call gun violence restraining orders. Now, they frame it that way because it sounds good. We're stopping gun violence. No, you're denying people their 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights. Because, you see, anyone, and this is what's legal in places like California, where anyone, for any reason, with no proof required, can say, that guy's a danger, you need to take away his guns. They're not asking, well, why is he a danger? They're not asking how you know he's a danger. A complete and total stranger can report you as a danger, and the state of California will completely disarm you. That's a warrant with no probable cause. There is no due process. You are not allowed to face your accuser. You're not allowed a trial until after you've been convicted. You have no legal representation. Nothing. That's why I have that. Now, granted, I live in Texas. And I doubt, very seriously, that Texas will ever have anything like this, at least not in my lifetime. But we have enough people in Congress who support this crap that if given enough power, they will try to pass this on a federal level. And then someone in New York could say that I am a danger to them because I told them on Twitter that they are wrong. Never met me. Don't know what I look like. Don't know what I sound like. Don't know my name. Don't know where I live. Nothing. But because I told them they're wrong on Twitter, they go to their local police station and say, this person is a danger. The police, then under a red flag law, have power they shouldn't. It violates your 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights. The 6th is the biggest one. Before you are punished, you have the right to a speedy and public trial, by jury if you wish. You have a right to know the charges against you before you are stripped of any property. You have a right to confront your accuser and the witnesses. And you have the right to an attorney. It's very simple. The 7th Amendment, you have the right to never be put in double jeopardy. Basically, you cannot have a case that's already decided be examined again by another court. So you're essentially tried twice for the same crime. Now, this is what means that O.J. Simpson did not go to jail for murder and never will go to jail for murder. But this does not mean you cannot be sued civilly, even if acquitted of the criminal charges. It's very much why O.J. Simpson has almost no money today. But he is still a free man, and there are many who still contend he got away with murder. Unless in the case of a mistrial or a hung jury. The judge basically says this trial is a farce, we've had too many rules broken, I'm declaring a mistrial, and we're going to start over. You're not being tried twice. You're basically being told both attorneys and the jury will be completely replaced so that anyone tainted by this trial will not be a part of it. A hung jury, the jury cannot decide. That's where they get another jury. Still the same court, the same case. But that's it. If you're acquitted of a crime, you cannot be tried in any court for the same crime. Ironically, leading to people having ideas like, if someone accuses me of killing my significant other, and this is a ploy by my significant other to get me put in jail so they get everything and get to run away, and ultimately I'm acquitted because someone spots my significant other, oh look, they're not dead. Well, you're acquitted, you're innocent, you didn't do it. Technically you could do it, and you can't be tried again. It's a false idea, because it's two actions. You cannot get away with murder. It's an interesting thought experiment, but it's wrong. The Eighth Amendment, no excessive bail and no cruel or unusual punishment. This one is a very sticky legal item. We saw it just a couple of years ago where you had a white suspect and a black suspect, and the bails were very much different until you look at it and you realize with the white suspect, they were only listing the bail for one charge. There were other charges where no bail was allowed, and so on and so forth. The black suspect was a very wealthy celebrity who was a flight risk. And they said, no, we're not letting you have bail. You'll skip town. Not at all based on race. One of them, not famous, not rich, none of it, allowed bail because they had to, by law, allow for bail on certain charges. But on others, no bail allowed. You're stuck in jail. The other, very wealthy, very famous, very much able to leave the country. No bail, flight risk. Completely legitimate scenario. But we have people who don't understand the system talking about the system. The Ninth Amendment is very much a junk drawer, a just in case we missed anything amendment. You have the rights to any rights not listed in this document. They didn't address certain things because certain things didn't exist yet. Okay? Conscription into the military was not a thing. We didn't have a standing army. So there was no need to lay out the draft. Just one example. And the 10th Amendment is the States' Rights Amendment. Any power not specifically delegated to the federal government remains with the people. Anything not given to the state remains with the people. In this case, the state is the Fed, people are the states. This is done to limit the federal government from saying, well, this wasn't listed, but it's still ours. No, very much it has to be, we believe this is something we should do, and the states have to agree to it. You can break these down as well. The First Amendment is very much, it protects individual rights, and it protects minorities from majority rule. Okay? You cannot say 95% of the people in this country are Christian or Jewish or any other faith. So everyone has to be. No, that 5% still has the right to their own faith. It's just the way that England was not. So it's the way we are. The second through fourth are to correct mistakes made during the war. We're not going to quarter soldiers. We're not going to strip citizens of their firearms. Just two examples. Fifth through eighth are the rights of the accused. And the ninth and 10th are the rights of the states and the citizens. It's very much a commentary on how government was in Britain and everything they saw wrong with it. In Britain, the king is the sovereign. In the U.S., popular sovereignty. The people are the power. Here we have limited government, not the king is in charge. Separation of powers. Yes, you had the House of Commons and the House of Lords and Parliament, but they're still just beholden to the king. There are checks and balances as opposed to a king that can just say, nope, I'm the king, I can do what I want. We are federalist. To a point, because we do have a central government. But we are also anti-federalist because the people still retain power. That is republicanism. We are a republic. We are not a democracy. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Yes, a republic is a form of democracy, but we are not a democracy. a democracy would have zero federal legislation. Everything would be put to a vote. We are a representative republic. Every 2 or 4 years, we vote for our representatives in the federal government. For the next 2 or 4 years, those people govern in our place. They debate and negotiate and pass laws. There are still some things that we vote on, yes. Okay, a city bond to build a new football stadium or whatnot. But that is because that football stadium comes from the money in Dallas, Texas, or Atlanta, Georgia, or Los Angeles, California. Anyone outside that jurisdiction should not be asked their opinion because they're not going to pay. It's that simple. And individual rights. Until pretty recently, the British citizenry did not have any rights, especially 240 odd years ago. It wasn't feudal England where the lords ruled the peasants, but it was still very much the king rules. You say something wrong about the king, you could be put to death. In some cases today, they still don't. You can be detained at the Queen's pleasure. Literally thrown in jail. No trial unless the Queen decides you get one. Whereas here, it's codified into our founding document. You have the right to a speedy public trial. By jury if you want. We were fixing what we saw as the mistakes and still leaving an avenue to say this document is not perfect. Likely never will be. The 26th Amendment, for example. When we started off, it was only male landowners who were citizens who could vote. Women were still citizens, and foreigners could own land. But only male landowners could vote. After 1865, it became male citizens could vote. Despite the Democratic Party and the KKK, their creation, trying to stop it. In the early 1900s, women became able to vote. At this point, it was every U.S. citizen over the age of 21 without distinction of race or creed or gender. Then, in 1972, oddly enough, what would have been my parents' first election to vote in became the second they should have voted in. It was in 1972 that the 26th Amendment was passed, stating that all U.S. citizens aged 18 years or more shall not be denied the right to vote. My parents turned 22 in late October, early November of 1972. They voted for the first time that year. Had this amendment passed earlier, when it passed, it basically said 18, so they should have been able to vote in 68. But it's just an interesting story to think about. But 1972 is when 18-year-olds became legal to vote. Today we have states saying they're going to let 16-year-olds vote. You can't do that. It has to be a constitutional amendment. It's that simple. That is the document. How it's laid out, how it frames our government, and how it is legal to change it. That's all there is. And for now, that's all there is for this video. Let me know what you think. The next couple of videos will be delving deeper into Articles 1, 2, and 3, because I know I very quickly glossed over the three branches of government, but I wanted to cover an overview of the document today, and then over the next 2 or 3 videos, cover each branch of the government. Once we finish that, so either in 2 or 3 weeks, then we very much begin our leapfrog through time. There's not a lot that happened between 1781 and 1812. 1812 sees something happen. 1860 sees something happen. There are times in there where a state will become a state. But there's a lot of just normal everyday life. So I'm not going to be going over just every single year in excruciating detail. We're looking at the influential events. You'll want to be subscribed so you get notifications for all new videos. This series, is every Wednesday at 10 a.m., but I do post other videos. So please make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Please also make sure to like and share the video. It affects the algorithm and it widens the conversation. Please also let me know what you think. Just remember to remain civil. We can disagree, we can dissent, we can debate, but do it civilly. When you start insulting, when you start calling people names, that's when you get hidden or blocked. Debate civilly, disagree all you want. Just remain civil. Until next time, everyone, have a wonderful day.